Decoding Buddhism, Part 1. Decoding the Lost Teachings of the Buddha. Introduction. The one term in Buddhism that changed everything. Throughout my years of studying Buddhism, one specific term and its implied meaning shattered my understanding of everything I knew about Buddhism, igniting a newfound quest for deeper truths. I had followed the Buddha's middle way and the Noble Eightfold Path for years, studying and practicing the fundamental essence of Buddhism. However, as I delved into the Buddha's more obscure teachings from the earliest known recorded Buddhist texts, the Nikayas from the Sutta Pitaka in the Theravada canon, I stumbled upon a particular hush-hush term that changed everything. What I uncovered was not just a brain teaser. It was the ultimate Buddhist mind-bender, a doctrine that shakes the very foundations of Buddhism itself. Surprisingly, this teaching has been overlooked by many followers of Buddhism and dismissed by monks, who believe they will eventually understand it solely through more meditation, yet my discovery suggests otherwise. I found that, in fact, Buddha's teaching on this point could be decoded, and is indeed comprehensible without the need for or reliance on deep states of introspection. What is needed, however, is the right knowledge combined with the right perspective and reasoning, what the Buddha calls right view, to realize the true nature of this teaching. Meditation then complements and deepens this inner realization, helping us to internalize the path home. This singular term and its core concept lie at the heart of the Buddha's doctrine. Its meaning has not been openly discussed in modern times due to its controversial nature. It is the misinterpretation of this concept that has caused Buddhism to clash with other spiritual traditions. But if it were removed, the rest of the Buddha's teachings would crumble. That's how central this concept is. Sadly, mainstream Buddhism today has become synonymous with what the Buddha never taught. No God, no self, no soul, and hence, no immortality. The crucial term I am referring to is the Pali term anatta, or the Sanskrit anatman, commonly translated as no self or no soul, implying that we have no permanent self or soul and that clinging to the idea of one is what leads to suffering. In Buddhism, this concept is known as the doctrine of anatta. Here I stood, feeling as though my world was falling apart. I asked myself, what did the Buddha really say and mean 2,500 years ago? Did he negate the existence of God? Did he deny the individual soul and its chance at immortality? These questions had never crossed my mind until now. I had experienced the Buddha personally in my meditations, sensing him as a being of spirit, more alive than ever as an ascended master on the etheric plane, one dimension of the heaven world. Suddenly, I found myself with more questions than answers, especially regarding the doctrine of anatta, and its apparent contradictions with the Buddha's teachings on the Buddha nature and the realized Buddha. We will explore these aspects further in the chapters ahead. One statement that particularly caught my attention was from a book on Buddhism called No Inner Core, which suggests that only a Buddha can truly penetrate the nature of anatta. True insight, it asserts, can be achieved only through vipassana meditation, most preferably under the guidance of a trained monk. I found this statement denigrating, rigid, and misleading because essentially it discourages lay followers from attempting to understand the anatta concept, claiming that only diligent vipassana practice can lead to true insight. Furthermore, the book's title bluntly asserts that there is no inner core, implying we have no real self or soul. Naturally, I took issue with this, as there are multiple ways to interpret and intuit the Buddha's teachings. In my understanding, excluding other viewpoints limits the individual experience and fosters dogmatic thinking. The Buddha's central point was that all insight ought to be grounded in direct, empirical experience. As the story goes, the Buddha, at the moment of his enlightenment, was approached by Mara, the evil one, who challenged the Buddha and said, "O enlightened one, you have attained liberation. Now pass into final nirvana. There is no point for you in trying to teach others, as the Dharma is subtle and difficult to comprehend." The Buddha took to silence, pondering what Mara said, when suddenly the Brahma god, Sahampati, appeared to the Buddha and said, "There are beings with little dust in their eyes, who, if they hear the Dharma, will understand. You must not abandon them. The Buddha then resolved to not take leave and responded to Mara, "I will not enter nirvana yet, for I have yet to help the suffering beings in this world. Until they have been guided to the path, I will not leave." Reading this, I thought to myself, perhaps these Buddhists, who seem so intellectually above the rest of us by embracing the established no-self doctrine, create an illusion of profundity while missing the essence of its truth. In doing so, they misinterpret anatta by failing to perceive beyond it, to grasp a higher order of reality beyond the known. As I began to uncover the implied meaning of this term, institutionalized by the Theravadins, I felt a clash of bewilderment and fear mixed with excitement. This is a huge find, I told myself. Why is no one talking about this? Realizing that Buddhism either stands or falls on the true meaning of this one term shook me to my core. I asked myself, is what the Buddha taught nihilistic, or is it, as claimed by some, a path to the true freedom of the soul and a return to source? An overwhelming urge to re-examine the Buddha's core teachings arose within me. I decided to delve deeper, like an investigative reporter, to decode the essence of this concept and any related teachings that give it context. Both the Theravada and Mahayana Buddhist schools teach that the Buddha's path to liberation leads to a midpoint between eternalism and nihilism, between existence and non-existence, some kind of limbo state of being neither dead nor alive, a bizarre interpretation of the Buddha's middle way, rooted in the doctrine of anatta. Later in the chapter on the Buddha's middle way, we will explore the concepts of emptiness, shunyata, and the lack of intrinsic value, asvabhava, in the treatise called The Fundamental Verses on the Middle Way, Mulla Madhya Makha Karika. These verses, written in the 2nd century CE by the renowned Buddhist philosopher Nagarjuna, have significantly altered Buddhist beliefs and doctrines on what constitutes anatta. Buddhist monks and nuns often avoid discussing the key concept of no-self, as it tends to deter those seeking clarity, personal freedom, and happiness. However, if we understand it the way some scholars and Buddhologists explain it today, the Buddhist path suggests there is much more to the story, and we need to unravel this mystery and crack the code. Could there be a real self in Buddhism, and what about a soul? What clues or evidence can we find? We will explore this as we go along. Throughout history, the Buddha faced numerous accusations, most notably of being an atheist due to his apparent silence on God. He was also accused of teaching that we lack a permanent self or soul, implying that nothing within us can achieve immortality, because nothing within us has any permanent, intrinsic realness, asvabhava. These controversies fueled my newfound quest for answers. The Buddha refrained from discussing these metaphysical matters because he believed such debates would only jumble the mind and cloud our understanding. He saw them as unskillful practices that do not lead to nirvana. Ever since, Gautama has been seen as a rebel, opposing the Brahmins' teachings on karma and their religious rituals, including that of animal sacrifice. He also strongly opposed their rigid caste system in its declining form and how the Brahmins exploited it to exert control over the people. And he took one revolutionary step no one had done before, by accepting women into his order to fully benefit from his teachings. Despite this, the Buddha's focus was not on the politics of his day, religious rituals, or speculations about God, but rather on the individual's final liberation from suffering, and he expressly said so, quote, "All I teach is suffering and the end of suffering." End quote. You could say the Buddha taught a crash course in attaining freedom from suffering, regardless of one's political and spiritual convictions or status in society. Imagine if the Buddha were alive in today's world and decided to go public to teach a crash course on the psychology of happiness and how to end suffering. What would that look like? His message would still transcend religious and cultural divides. He would encounter the same types of people from all walks of life. Some religious with differing convictions, some with political agendas, some with a secular perspective, and some with an atheistic or doubting mindset. Simply put, the Buddha would not be discussing the biblical God of the Jews, Christians, and Muslims, nor the many Hindu gods, the Incan and Egyptian sun gods, the Norse or Greek gods of weather and natural forces, or any other deity. To avoid offending anyone, he would maintain a neutral stance, steering clear of all gods and instead focus on the psychological aspects of happiness. In this way, his teachings would apply universally, allowing anyone, regardless of belief or status, to benefit from them. This neutrality does not mean Gautama denied the existence of the soul, the real self, or God. In much the same way, Gautama was free to speak to anyone in his time by maintaining a neutral stance on many topics, focusing solely on his central agenda, the end of suffering. It's important to note that he was not just addressing the human condition of pain and misery, but rather the suffering of the soul, which must suffer through numerous incarnations, living and dying, until it purifies its many desires, balances its negative karmic deeds, and achieves samsaric cessation. Gautama's approach, therefore, was designed to fast-track anyone toward personal liberation in a single lifetime, rather than spending numerous lives accumulating karma with little hope of progress. In the aftermath, we are left wondering what the Buddha conveyed as truth, as he often tailored his sermons to meet people's individual needs, a teaching method known as upaya, meeting people where they are. The Buddha's teachings have inspired us to always seek the deeper, hidden meaning, both in his words and by his silence. For example, during his flower sermon, the Buddha held a lotus flower in his hand without uttering a single word. Of those assembled, only the Venerable Mahakasyapa smiled during the sermon when he experienced an enlightening moment, grasping the Buddha's insight. Through this sermon, the Buddha taught that the nature of the eternal truth or Dharma must be experienced to be truly understood, as it is difficult, if not impossible, to convey in words, even when we do grasp it. Over time, the Buddha's unanswered questions and silent sermons have caused us to speculate on the unsaid, thus leaving the door open for ongoing insights and revelations by aspirants on the path. In this way, the Buddha beautifully leads us to explore the mystery of eternal beingness. Many years ago, I encountered Gautama through the teachings of the Ascended Masters, beings who have transcended samsara and are no longer bound by karma or reincarnation. These enlightened ones have attained what is known as the ascension in the light, ascension into the luminous essence called parinirvana in Buddhism. In our time, Gautama communicated through modern-day messengers like Mark and Elizabeth Clare Prophet, sharing his wisdom from the etheric plane. Across the ages, these masters have reached us through prophets, advanced adepts, students, and messengers capable of hearing and seeing them, as well as transmitting their teachings. Our role, then, is to discern if these messengers are genuine and aligned with our highest good, and if so, to absorb and apply the teachings they convey. I could see how Buddhists, whether from the Theravada, Mahayana, Vajrayana, Zen, Pure Land, or other Buddhist schools, avoid talking about Buddhanatta openly because the so-called doctrine does not help in spreading Buddhism. Who in their right mind would consciously choose a path that teaches the annihilation of their being and identity, where the end goal is nothing more than a limbo state of existence? Most people familiar with Buddhism are aware that Gautama taught the Four Noble Truths, describing the nature of suffering and the end to suffering through the Eightfold Path. They might also be familiar with the Buddha's middle way, the balanced midpoint between extremes, and his teachings on impermanence, where change is the only constant. Conversely, if you ask them about anatta, the no-self, no-soul doctrine of the Buddha, they may give you a blank stare, completely clueless as to what you are talking about. The troubling thought is that this doctrine permeates all of Buddhism to such an extent that, without realizing it, we easily accept the wrong view of self-negation, which only furthers our ignorance. The venerable Theravadan scholar, Mr. Nyanatiloka Mahathera, stated, "With the doctrine of anatta, stands or falls the entire Buddhist structure." This raises the crucial question: was Gautama advocating soul freedom or the annihilation of the self as the way to end suffering? And what about the soul itself, as there is no equivalent term for soul in Buddhism, unlike in Hinduism or Jainism? Some things did not add up, and therefore I had to understand what the Buddha really meant by teaching the concept of anatta. This mystery compelled me to unravel its true meaning, leading to astonishing discoveries, insights that, to my knowledge, have not been decoded previously in the way I will in this book. The Buddha's big picture perspective, the true nature of reality. The way to bring clarity and purpose to the path is to first see the big picture, knowing the exit before entering, by simply asking, what's at the end of the journey? What's the end goal, and what is the method to achieve it? To be a follower of the Buddha, we only need to understand the basics of his teachings to begin the journey, as he designed a path accessible to anyone, regardless of our level of understanding or station in life. However, to pursue higher levels of enlightenment, we must dispel ignorance, avidya, by understanding where the Buddha's path leads. Only then can we begin to fit the missing pieces together to form a more complete picture of his perspective on reality, and his path to freedom before proceeding further. Like any experienced traveler knows, venturing out on a journey without knowing the destination is not the way of wisdom. There are several components of the Buddha's teachings that form a big picture perspective, which, when understood, can help us achieve an enlightened mind. Without these key pieces, we may miss the essence of Buddhism altogether. Historically, Buddhist teachings were scattered across the land and were not written down for over 450 years. During this time, biases developed, resulting in the formation of 18 different schools of early Buddhism, each with its unique interpretations. Eventually, they either merged into the Theravada or Mahayana branches or dissolved. Only recently have several key Buddhist texts been rediscovered, teachings that could reshape controversial doctrines and potentially redirect mainstream Buddhism from what I perceive as a nihilistic path toward a more life-affirming journey of soul freedom. These resurfaced teachings, such as the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, the Terma treasure texts of Padmasambhava, and manuscripts from the Dunhuang grottos, reveal deeper insights into the true nature of the self. Hidden in mountains, caves, lakes, ancient monasteries, and even within statues, these teachings were kept from the wider circle of followers who weren't ready for such advanced teachings when they were written. Moreover, as I delved into these materials, I discovered that the Theravadan Abhidhamma Pitaka, a collection of commentaries on the Buddha's teachings, has also been subject to misinterpretations over time, particularly regarding the doctrine of anatta, as noted by Buddhologist and Pali translator Ken Wheeler. This opens the door to re-examining the Buddha's core doctrines and considering alternative perspectives, a journey I will guide you through in this book. Furthermore, when I understood that Buddhism shares core teachings with Vedanta, the teachings from the Vedas, everything began to make sense. According to Dr. Conrad Elst, an expert scholar on the history and culture of India, the Buddha did not rebel against the ancient Vedas, but rather extracted from them the essential truths that aligned with his main objective. Viewing the Buddha's core doctrine from this emerging perspective aligns it more closely with other spiritual traditions, no longer clashing with their theistic beliefs. Yet mainstream Buddhism today resists this emerging picture, often taking pride in its stance by claiming non-theism, which isn't surprising. Long-established schools tend to hold fast to their traditional views and doctrines, seeing them as the Buddha's true teachings. In many cases, later discovered esoteric teachings, such as those found in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, are dismissed under the category of upaya as skillful means. Upaya refers to the Buddha's ability to adapt his teachings based on his audience's spiritual attainment, presenting provisional teachings that act as stepping stones rather than ultimate truths. This upaya framework allows Buddhists to preserve established doctrines without needing to incorporate teachings that appear to diverge from or extend beyond traditional views. For example, in both the Mahayana and Theravada schools, teachings that challenge the established texts are often conveniently labeled as upaya, thereby reducing their status and minimizing their perceived importance. Let us take a look at the parable of the burning house from the Lotus Sutra, which effectively exemplifies the main idea of an upaya teaching. A wealthy man had many children who were playing inside a house that caught fire. Knowing the children were too absorbed in their play to notice the danger or heed his warnings, he lured them out by promising wonderful toys outside, like carts drawn by goats, deer, and oxen. Excited by the promise, the children rushed out and were saved. Once they were safe, the wealthy man gave them an even greater gift than he had promised: a single magnificent cart. This parable illustrates how the Buddha initially offered teachings that appealed to the understanding or immediate needs of his followers, the toys, only to reveal a higher truth once they were ready, the magnificent cart. In this way, an upaya teaching serves as a means to guide beings toward ultimate truth, rather than being the ultimate truth itself. However, this use of upaya can be problematic when applied to teachings like the Maha-Parinirvana Sutra. According to Dr. Tony Page, this teaching was delivered by the Buddha as his final and most elevated truth teaching before his passing, despite knowing it would upset and challenge some followers. Dr. Page argues that this sutra reveals and describes the Buddha's doctrine on the Tathagata, the self-realized Buddha, a teaching which transcends the provisional methods of upaya, and so transcends anatta. Therefore, to classify the Maha-Parinirvana Sutra as upaya is to misunderstand its significance and the evolutionary nature of the Buddha's teachings. This is where we can see evidence of a split within the Sangha community, as the Mahayana version of the Maha-Parinirvana Sutra includes concepts absent in the Theravada version. Those who adhered strictly to the older anatta teaching formed the basis of the Theravada school, while those who adopted the Mahayana version accepted the new and most elevated teachings introduced by the Buddha before his passing. Additionally, Buddhists often fail to see that even after the Buddha became enlightened, he still kept evolving, as well as his teachings and his students. In fact, the sutra represents the culmination of Buddha's spiritual guidance, offering a complete vision of liberation that includes the eternal Dharma body, the Dharmakaya, which is the recognition of the self-realized one, which earlier teachings only hinted at. He also dismissed his original teachings on anatta, calling them old milk. Dharma teachings are not just teachings of the path but are understood as absolute, eternal, and unchanging truths that underlie all existence, woven into the fabric of the universe. They represent the fundamental laws or principles that govern reality, transcending samsara. These ultimate truths go beyond the provisional nature of upaya and are everywhere existing in a dimension called akasha, accessible to anyone who can tune in through meditation. Akasha is a dimension that contains both these eternal truths and all karmic deeds, recorded and preserved there, much like computer programming code and data stored on a hard drive. Although upaya was indeed used to guide beings gradually toward enlightenment, dismissing advanced teachings such as those found in the Maha-Parinirvana Sutra as mere upaya diminishes their transformative power. When fully understood, the sutra offers a profound shift in perspective, leading to a more complete understanding of the Buddha's path to liberation. The Buddha grounded his teachings in empirical findings and urged us to apply the same scrutiny by seeking direct experience. Ultimately, he said, "The path is one we must walk alone, validated through our own insights and experiences." My newfound quest. Looking through the lens of the Buddha, introduced to us in modern times as an ascended master, and through the life of Siddhartha, the incarnate Buddha of long ago, I have come to see the bigger picture and have discovered several missing pieces. My desire to decode these age-old mind-benders and bridge 2,500 years of speculation is what compelled me to journey into Buddhism, to investigate further, and to write this book. In my quest for answers, I realized that very few are pursuing this cross-boundary research in Buddhism, as addressing all the issues in the field would take a lifetime, and unsurprisingly, no one had. However, my own partial awakening led me to a pivotal insight. I saw no need for such an exhaustive approach because solving the mystery of the self and the soul in Buddhism holds the key to unlocking and unraveling most everything else. With this clarity, my mission began to reveal itself. At the outset, my quest appeared straightforward, but that was far from the case. Despite the vast amount of information available today, finding the right knowledge still remains a challenge, as much of the information that contradicts the established views on the anatta doctrine has been suppressed or is simply hard to find. In the end, what gave me the purpose to reconnect these missing links and to see this case through was my deep connection to Gautama. In modern times, Mark and Elizabeth Clare Prophet have served as messengers for Gautama Buddha and many ascended masters. Through their work, Gautama has clarified some of the ambiguities that have persisted in his teachings. Through his dictations, he has explained why certain topics were left unanswered and what was missing from his early teachings. The doctrine of no-self will be explored in Part 3, Decoding the Anatta Doctrine, which sheds new light on these mysteries. Throughout my journey, I realized I needed to attain a deeper level of insight and spiritual understanding, an intuitive wisdom known as prajna, in order to decode the Buddhist mindbenders and go beyond established views. This profound realization inspired me to seek truth and integration. Not being a scholar or a Buddhist monk meant that I wasn't restricted by a scholar's potential biases of academia, nor bound by a monk's adherence to his school or established doctrines. Thus, I was free to explore beyond the boundaries of convention, driven by a quest for genuine insight. As we journey through these pages together, I invite you to open your heart, mind, and soul to discern what resonates as truth for you as I share my findings. My aim is to offer a coherent perspective while recognizing that truth, as we perceive and experience it, is by nature subjective and ever-evolving, open to continual revelation and a deeper knowing. My hope is that this knowledge brings you closer to Gautama Buddha and to the awakening of your own Buddha nature. Decoding Buddhism offers fresh perspectives to help you form your views on traditional Buddhist creeds and commentaries, alongside more recent esoteric teachings, including those revealed by the ascended Master Gautama in our time. Ultimately, it is up to you to discern what resonates as truth for you and to follow your own inner guidance. The path to enlightenment is a deeply personal journey of self-realization, one that seeks alignment with the Absolute, the unchanging, eternal essence we call God, known in the East as Brahman. My secondary motivation is to provide you with a practical guide to apply Gautama's Eightfold Path. Gautama was pragmatic. He taught the inner path to transcend samsara and end suffering through the most expedient route. We will explore the Noble Eightfold Path as an accelerated path to balance negative karma, in conjunction with the transmutative power of the violet sacred fire, a spiritual energy bestowed upon us for the Aquarian age by the Ascended Masters. This sacred fire can be invoked to transmute our past and present karmas, as well as preventing the creation of future karmas rooted in our current ignorance. Join me now on this journey to decode the mysteries of Buddhism. Together, we will delve into its mind-bending concepts and cut through the layers of illusion that obscure what I believe the Buddha truly taught regarding God, the soul, the self, and immortality. But let's not stop there. Let's take the bull by the horns and steer it toward the highest goal, parinirvana, the ascension in the light. By the end of this journey, I hope you'll experience Buddhism from a whole new vantage point, just as I did. The first chapter awaits. Let's dive right in.